Well, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today for our virtual Mind Walk. We really appreciate you attending. My name is Laurel. I'm an Interpreter 1 for the Oceano Dunes District in California State Parks. And today we have a great presentation for you from wildlife biologist Rachel Roberts. Mind Walks are a lecture series hosted by California State Parks and the Central Coast State Parks Association. They're hosted every month and alternate between in-person and virtual offerings. You can check out the list of upcoming lectures and an archive of past recordings at the CSPA website shown on the screen. The Mind Walks program is underwritten by the Thomas E. and Mary Catherine Eltzroth Fund and supported by our partners at the Central Coast State Parks Association. The Central Coast State Parks Association is a nonprofit that funds and supports educational programs in the state parks of San Luis Obispo County. They help to fund anything from new museum exhibits, school group transportation, or guided educational activities like the Mind Walk series. If you'd like to help support the Mind Walk program or other state park educational opportunities, please check out the link at the bottom of the screen. To learn more about how you can donate to these programs and receive some perks, you can find this information at the Central Coast State Parks Association website. Today's presentation will last roughly 30 to 45 minutes. There'll be time at the end for questions. To ask our presenter a question, you can use the Q&A or chat box at the bottom of your screen. You may ask your question at any time during the presentation, but we won't get to them until the presentation is over. Today's program will be recorded, so if you need to head out early, or if you want to share this presentation with anyone else, it will be available to watch next week. Rachel Roberts is a wildlife biologist who has been working with various species in Central California for over 10 years. Rachel received her bachelor's and master's degrees from San Jose State University, where her thesis research was focused on the food and habits of bobcats. Her college research experience helped lead her to her current position at the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, where she is coordinating a statewide bobcat population monitoring project, which will culminate in a bobcat management plan in 2025. It's our pleasure to introduce you to Rachel Roberts. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your expertise.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Laurel. Thanks again. Thank you for having me here to speak with you today about bobcats, arguably one of the coolest critters in California. As Laurel mentioned, my name is Rachel Roberts. I'm the Senior Environmental Scientist, the Bobcat Specialist for the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. And also mentioned, I did my master's and my bachelor's at San Jose State and studied bobcats there, which has led me, I believe, to where I am today. I'm coming to you from the California Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Wildlife Branch, and within that, the Wildlife Diversity Program. Our mission you can see here, and basically it's a group of professional biologists who are studying everything from birds and mammals and invertebrates. They write scientific collecting permits and they review special status species. And so it's a great bunch of folks and I'm really proud to be part of this group. So go and check us out. The outline of my presentation today, I'm going to give you some basic biology of bobcats and answer some questions about why we would want to study bobcats, which will lead to a discussion over the statewide bobcat population monitoring project. And then what you should do if you see a bobcat, and then we'll put it all together at the end. So basic bobcat biology. First of all, are you seeing a bobcat or a lynx? This is a great question. It comes up all the time. A lot of people giving us a call saying they see a lynx in their yard, which would be really cool, but you're seeing a bobcat in your yard. The lynx here is on the right, and the bobcat photo on the left I took. It's a little bit far away, so it looks like the bobcat is smaller than the lynx, and it is in real life, but not much smaller. Just depends on where that bobcat lives. They do have shorter legs and smaller feet. But most importantly, the bobcat lives in the lower 48, and the Canadian lynx is more in northern regions. So these maps here show you that the bobcat range is on the left, and bobcats live throughout California as well as every state that we know of in the United States. So my presentation about wildcats in California and beyond, not just California. And then the Canadian lynx live up north. So if you are seeing a critter with a bobbed tail and it looks like a big cat in your yard, you are seeing a bobcat, which is very exciting. So how does that compare to a mountain lion or a domestic cat? So mountain lions are generally much larger than bobcats. You know, if you have a smaller female that you're seeing, then it could be about twice as big as a bobcat. But in general, bobcats are about a fourth of the size of a mountain lion. And then they're bigger than your domestic cat. I know that me personally, I love my animals and I like to make sure they're nice and plump and feed them well. So there are some domestic cats out there that can end up being big, you know, big like a bobcat. But the thing about bobcats is that they have a bobbed tail, which is pretty unique. And they have this unique spot or stripe pattern. Pelage is called pelage. And they have tufted ears and the ruff around the face. They have larger paws and larger back legs. So if you're seeing something like that, then you're probably seeing a bobcat, and then your house cat's going to be a little bit smaller, 2 to 3 times smaller, unless they're well fed. Bobcat biology, they're a medium-sized carnivore. They can weigh between 8 to 39 pounds. The largest bobcat that we've had on our project was 36 pounds, and that was in the Sierras just north of Truckee. They are sexually dimorphic, which means that the males are larger and they average about 22 pounds, and females are smaller, they average about 16 pounds. They have this distinct bobbed tail, as I mentioned before. The tail also has a pattern on it, which can be unique to the individual. They also have these tufts on the tops of their ears, little hairs between like half an inch to an inch long that stick off the top of their ears and are most of the time are black. So tufted ear tips, and they have a unique pelage. So the spots on the insides of the legs and on the outside of the body and around the face are unique to that individual, and you can tell individuals apart based on those spots. And I will talk about that a bit more later. Bobcat reproduction. They generally breed in the spring. Kittens are born between February and March. This can vary depending on latitude and depending on weather and food availability. Most of the kittens we see are born in the spring, but if a female for some reason loses her kittens, she can go into estrus again and have another litter of kittens later in the year. So this shows us sometimes we'll see kittens at odd times of the year at different parts of California. So they can have kittens pretty much anytime. They like to den in rocky areas, rocky cavities and hollow logs and dense brush. This photo here is from the Santa Monica Mountains National Recreation Area. Those folks out there have been studying bobcats for many years, and they found these kittens in a hollow log. I believe it was in 2021 from after the Woolsey fire. And that was the first time that we know of that bobcat kittens were found in a tree. So this was actually a hollowed out tree from the fire. Kitten litter size is between 1 and 6 kittens, although most of the time it's generally 2 to 4 kittens. And kittens are pretty small when they're born. They weigh less than a pound. This is another example of a denning area. This is me awkwardly on the ground looking under these rocks. The den is back up under these rocks, and we had a collar that was dropped under these rocks, and we were trying to get it. So that's why I have all these tools in front of me, because I'm just like, I can't reach it. And then up here, this is my coworker. This is the top of the den. And again, it's too deep. We can't reach down in there. And as you look at these rocks over here in the photo to the right, it's about a 15-foot drop off to the bottom, and that bottom is where I'm laying on the left. So this gives you a good idea of bobcat den, den sites. Pretty cool areas that they can just crawl up into to have their kittens. They are considered generalists. This means that we believe that they can do pretty well in any kind of habitat. They live in deserts, in mountains, and woods, and chaparral, and they live in and amongst our neighborhoods sometimes. Their home ranges are between 420 to 9,800 acres. Again, this varies depending on how many bobcats live in the area, or the food availability, or how many humans live in the area. So it can be really a small home range or really a large home range, depending on all these other factors. So what do they eat? They are carnivores, and they primarily eat rabbits and rodents and birds, and they can take a baby deer every once in a while. Or they might eat on a deer carcass that they have found from a mountain lion kill. They do eat reptiles and amphibians and invertebrates. When I was doing my food habit study, I found Jerusalem crickets in the bobcat scats on my study, which was really kind of cool and kind of gross at the same time. But they do have a taste for chicken and geese, unfortunately. And so that's where we end up in conflict with bobcats most of the time. They are considered ambush hunters, which means that they do that fun little cat thing where they crouch down and their tail twitches and their bodies twitch, and they just sit there and wait until they can pounce and surprise their prey and just kill it really quickly. They are considered to be crepuscular, which means that they are most active at dawn and dusk, although I have seen them any time of the day and night. So it depends on where you are and what the situation is. They are not afraid of being out during the day. So if you want to identify bobcat prints, they can be difficult to identify versus coyote and gray fox, but with any cat, your house cats and mountain lions, their claws stay retracted. So when you're looking at a print that has claw marks, these little dots here at the leading edge, those show that it's probably a canine. So the bobcat prints generally do not have claw marks. They're generally more round than coyote prints. Coyotes are pretty long and narrow. And bobcats are round, and they're about 1 inch to 2.5 inches wide. And another distinguishing factor can be the ridge between the toe pads and the heel pad. On bobcats, it tends to be more of an arc, and then with coyotes, it's more of a pyramid shape. All of this could be thrown out the window if you're looking at prints in the snow, here prints in the sand or in mud. Sometimes it's really hard to tell. So none of this can be a hard and fast rule for identifying bobcat prints. It just takes a lot of practice. And then for identifying bobcat scats, again, hard to distinguish between fox, coyote, and bobcat scats. Takes a lot of practice. Bobcat and coyote scats tend to be about the same diameter. So that can't always be a good indication, but in general, bobcat scats are between 7/16 and 7/8 of an inch. And they are typically, they have multi segments, but they're typically blunt. You know, some of them do have a point or a pinch, but this blunted boxy section, kind of very much like you see your house cat litter box, that is bobcat. That's indicated of bobcat. Also, bobcats have a more efficient digestive system, and so their scats end up being really compact with less hair. This coyote scat you see here on the left is really hairy, and coyote scat ends up being really, really sinuous, just kind of all over the place and long, and definitely with a pinch. So in case you ever wanted to figure out what bobcat versus coyote scats look like, there you go. So why are we looking at bobcat scats, and why are we looking at their prints, and why are we studying them? Well, as we all know, between the early 1700s into the 1800s, hunting and the fur trade was a big deal, not only of bobcats, but all kinds of critters in California and the United States. It's approximated that just between 1700 and 1709, that 750,000 bobcats and lynx were taken for the commercial fur trade. Last year, the Western States Fur Auction, their website says that the average bobcat pelt cost about $309, and the highest went for $1,400. The bobcat pelts sold for more money than any of the other animals that were sold by the Western States Fur Auction. You can see that on their website. And we generally think that bobcat populations are stable across the state, but we don't know, and that's a general statement for across the state. You know, like there are places in California where we think bobcats are doing well, and then there are places where we think, or we don't, you know, we just don't see as many bobcats. So we're interested in studying them to understand how the populations are doing across the state, and then to inform, you know, management decisions in the future. A little background on hunting. In 2013, the Bobcat Protection Act banned commercial hunting of bobcats. That was Assembly Bill 1213. And then in 2020, Assembly Bill 1254 made it unlawful to hunt, trap, or take bobcats. And that is how this project that I'm going to tell you about came about. And then just earlier this year, the fur products were prohibited under Assembly Bill 44. So Assembly Bill 1254, which was passed in 2020, has basically charged the California Department with Fish and Wildlife to come up with a bobcat management plan, which is due to the Fish and Game Commission by January 1st of 2025. The plan shall use credible science and an ecosystem-based approach to achieve these 5 goals, which are a current statewide bobcat population estimate based on the best available science, an assessment of the overall health of statewide bobcat populations, including trends, disease, toxin exposure, and genetics, a comprehensive strategy to manage bobcat populations and their habitats throughout the state, including an assessment of the effects of climate change, drought, wildfires, toxin, and the effects of human development on bobcats and their prey, an investigation of efficacious non-lethal solutions to prevent bobcat predation from chickens, on chickens or other domestic animals, and then also recommendations for regulatory changes that will be necessary to implement the bobcat management plan. So it turns out we have a lot of other reasons to study bobcats, not just about hunting. You know, normally drought would have been the top thing on the list, but this year flooding is also on the list. And the wildfire always a problem in California recently. forest management, which is, critical for aiding in management of wildfire. How does that affect bobcat populations? Disease and habitat fragmentation or habitat loss, partially due to roads. So road mortality is very important to look at, and bobcat and human interactions. So we have a lot of reasons to study bobcats, other than the fact that it's fun and they're great. So all of this has led to the California Statewide Bobcat Population Monitoring Project. And this project started about 2 years ago when I came on to work with CDFW. We have a fairly rigorous study design in order to answer all of the questions that we've been charged with. So I'll tell you all about that. We have 3 core data sources. We had camera arrays, fecal DNA analysis, GPS collars, and then we also opportunistically collected bobcat carcasses from across the state, and then the existing literature from other bobcat researchers, people who've been studying bobcats longer than I have. So as far as opportunistic mortalities go, basically we asked all of, Caltrans workers and other California Department of Fish and Wildlife workers, and rehab centers, anybody who found a bobcat dead or for some reason had euthanized a bobcat, we asked them to send their carcasses to our wildlife health lab in Rancho Cordova, and our wonderful colleagues over there tested these cats and did necropsy to understand why they died. And so all of that data is also going into our project. So our study areas, we had 50 study areas across the state. This map is showing you the 6 terrestrial CDFW regions, and each region we had 8 study areas plus 2 additional. Our study areas were 40 kilometers square in size, about 9,884 acres, based on what we think is the largest home range size of bobcats. And this region here that's large in the middle of the state is region 4, which is where you all live down here. And this star is one of our study areas that's in your backyard. And so I'll tell you a bit more about that in a minute. Here we go. This is the Choro study area. We were working within this study area between November and February of 2021 and 2022. It was a combination of all these landowners who allowed us to be on their property. And I'll tell you what we were doing there in a minute. But this map may look familiar to many of you with the state parks on here. But this black box is where our study area was, the El Choro Regional Park, along with Cal Poly Land and Los Padres National Forest, Camp San Luis Obispo. All these folks helped us out. So it was pretty exciting to come down and work in your area. Here's some photos from that study area. These were taken by our senior environmental scientists down there working on the Bobcat crew. It's just beautiful, as you know, but this picture in the top left is one of our camera stations. We had 2 cameras facing each other at each camera station along a trail so that we could get pictures of both sides of the bobcat so we could see their pelage. Each region had 3 biologists. So they had a senior and then 2 technicians who ran each study area. And so this is from that Region 4 Choro study area. Within each study area, we had camera arrays. We had 40 camera stations. This here is actually a study area from Cañada de los Osos, which is where I did my master's thesis. This is just outside of Gilroy. And so this shows you where our stations were, and the center dot is where the camera would have been. So we had two cameras facing each other. They're offset a little bit by a couple of meters so that they didn't flash each other. There was 1 kilometer between each station, and the cameras were out for 6 weeks. So basically those 3 folks had to go out and scout basically 10,000 acres and figure out where they're going to put their cameras, make maps, and then they had to hike these cameras out into the middle of nowhere in some cases, and put all these cameras up for 6 weeks, and they pull it all down and move to the next study area. So there's a lot of work, and also really exciting work at the same time. So from all of that photo data that we have gathered, we ended up with 23 million photos, which gave us about 46,000 bobcat photos. And from this, we are now doing pelage ID analysis. So this is a really fun kind of project for me, but also a bit, time consuming. But basically you are looking at bobcat photos from one study area, and you're looking through all the bobcat photos to see if it's the same individual or it's different individuals. This methodology is based on this paper from 2003, and you need 3 distinct differences in order for you to call this a different individual bobcat. So for example, here, this front leg on this bobcat on the left, kind of just like a little bit of an area here where there aren't any spots. And then on the bobcat on the right, there's really a lot of spots right there. So I would consider that to be one of the 3 indications that these 2 bobcats are different. So we're going to do that for all of these bobcat photos in order to understand how many individuals we have from each study area. We also walked transects in order to collect bobcat scats. So within each study area, we walked 40 kilometers, and we walked those kilometers 3 times. We tried to spread transects out across the study area, so on roads or game trails. Sometimes there weren't roads or game trails, so the workers would just walk on a random path that they created to see if they could find bobcat scats. We collected all scats that we thought were bobcat or coyote. And from that, we did a fecal DNA analysis to identify individual bobcats from each study area. So we're identifying individual bobcats based on pelage ID and then also on this fecal DNA. And we worked with the CDFW Genetics Research Laboratory, as well as the UC Davis Veterinary Genetics Laboratory. And once we have all of this information in hand, we are going to put some models together to understand occupancy and basic, population dynamics of bobcats in each study area. And then we will combine that information to get a more broad population estimate for the state. So with our fecal DNA transect, we walked about 6,000 kilometers of transects, and we collected 3,200 scats, which ended up being 1,200-ish bobcats and 462 unique individuals across the state. That is 228 females and 213 males and 21 unknowns. So that's really exciting. It's a lot of data. And our third piece of core data is our GPS color data. So within the last few years, we have put GPS colors on 46 bobcats across the state. And our GPS colors are collecting a data point about every 3 hours. This photo here is of a beautiful cat that we collared just north of Mono Lake on the eastern side of the Sierra. These are a few of her movements from her GPS collar. And as you can see, she was crossing 395. If you've never been there, it's a wide 4-lane road, I think in most places. It's a route that is heavily taken by tourists to get to the east side of Yosemite, as well as locals. And so the fact that she was crossing this road this many times is amazing. She did unfortunately die, but she was eaten by a mountain lion, which, you know, to me is a circle of life. And at least she wasn't hit by a car. But yeah, great data for us here with this cat. Back to our Choro bobcat study area. We are also capturing bobcat movements across roads, as I just mentioned in the last slide. So this map here shows you where our camera stations were at the Choro study area. Each number in the box represents the camera station number. And then the green boxes are where we saw bobcats on our camera stations. So you can see here that there are bobcats on both sides of State Route 1 there. And the coast is just there off to the left. So there isn't, you know, a whole lot of area for them to go to the left. So, you know, it's just really interesting to see the movements of bobcats across these major roads. The dots in the map are just where we collected bobcat scats. So disease is another thing that we are studying, as I mentioned before. One of the main things that we're looking at is notodendric mange. And this is also referred to as feline scabies. It's highly contagious skin infection, and it's caused by an ectoparasite. This one is primarily in felines, but it can also infest rodents and rabbits. Also maybe dogs and foxes, but I think the mange that dogs and foxes get is different. And so it's really unfortunate. And there are some hot spots where we see more mange. There are some places where we don't see any mange, but it can be fatal. And it's not necessarily that the mange itself is fatal. It's more that, you know, it renders the animal less healthy and less able to deal with any other kinds of disease or hunger, any of those types of things that it has to deal with. So you can tell in these photos, this is the same cat from two different cameras, that the skin just gets really crusty and it's very itchy. The animal ends up licking or scratching a lot of its fur off, and they end up really thin like this. It's hard for them to eat enough and just live in general. Another thing that we found recently was that one of our collared bobcats was found to have died from the highly pathogenic avian influenza that's going around. This was the first detection of the virus in a wild mammal in California. We have seen this virus in mammals across the United States at this point, and including bobcats. And so, you know, this is just really important to pay attention to this avian influenza and how that, you know, the CDC and everyone is tracking it and how it's moving through populations of birds. So bobcats can get it. So what should you do if you see a bobcat? If you know, it's in your yard, or it tries to come for your chickens or your pets, what should you do? So I was going to tell you a fluffy story about how bobcats are really afraid of humans and they never come close to us, and they don't want to have anything to do with us. And then this happened in the last few weeks. So for those of you who don't know, this kitty was in Arizona, and evidently it came through a doggy door, and I don't know if it attacked the dog that lived there or what. The dog was found later, and it had some lacerations on its side, so you have to assume that the bobcat had attacked the dog. But then it proceeded to hang out in this dog bed in this person's house until they came home. So when something like this happens, it's really rare. And oftentimes there's like something wrong, like the animal's hungry, or just like something is going on with it. So this type of situation is really rare. And in general, bobcats are elusive and they don't really want to be around humans, and it's easy to scare them away. But these types of things pop up every once in a while and make my job more interesting. So if you have a problem, if you find a bobcat, or you find a road-killed bobcat, or you have a bobcat that's coming into your chicken coop, you can contact your local biologist down there in San Luis Obispo. He is Brandon Swanson, and he's a fantastic biologist. His point of contact is here. The Wildlife Health Lab also has a mortality reporting form. And then we also, CDFW has a wildlife incident reporting system. All of these things you can find online, but basically, don't hesitate to reach out. But if you are having a problem with bobcats, especially in your chicken coop, there are definitely a lot of things that you could try to do first. So bringing your pets inside at night is really important. Be it your dogs or your cats, or securing your domestic poultry in their pen, or goats and sheep. All of these types of critters need to be within a protected enclosure at night. You don't want to leave their food outside to attract any other kind of pests. And there are a lot of other things that you can do to try to fortify that area to protect them from bobcats or any other predator. There is night lighting. They're called fox lights, and you can get some that are either on all the time, or that are they just flash really bright all of a sudden when they sense movement. There are also critter alarms that will sense movement, and then suddenly it'll just be really loud and it'll scare the animal away. You want to clear away any kind of brush or cover that's close to your pen, so that bobcat doesn't have anywhere to hide when it's coming in. Electric fencing works really great. I'll tell you about that in a second. And then amusingly, the Predator Pee Store will sell you some wolf urine that you can create a pee perimeter around your chicken coop if you'd like. So that sounds like really fun, a fun option. So this here is a case study that we did recently. This landowner, you can see their chicken coop there in the top left corner. And before we came out, this whole area had all of these bushes. This is kind of a chaparral type habitat. And the bushes came all the way up to the chicken coop. And they were losing their chickens. They had about 30 or so chickens, and they were just kind of letting them out during the day so they could get out and, roam around. But then they were disappearing. And they didn't realize that their chickens were going, what was happening, until they had two domestic geese that came up to their back door, and the bobcat just suddenly attacked one of their geese outside of their back door. And that was how they finally realized that it was a bobcat. And so we came out and just consulted with them and told them to clear some of this brush away. And we helped them put up this electric fence so that they could let their chickens roam outside. And then these are some photos that we got. We put cameras up around as well. And so you can see the bobcat kind of coming in next to the fence. It realizes that it's electric because it can hear it, can probably feel the electricity. And then it just runs off. So, again, these things work. So then putting it all back together, I've given you a lot of information about why we should study bobcats, and all of this is going to culminate in the California Bobcat Management Plan, which again will be out sometime in 2025. Hopefully you haven't seen way too many bobcat photos in this presentation today, but I'm going to leave you with one more thing. Sorry, there's some bird noises. And that's it. That's not it. We're playing it again. With that, I'll take questions.
That was wonderful. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Yeah.
Oh, it's fabulous. And really exciting to hear and see exactly how many bobcats are cruising around right here in our own backyard.
Yeah.
We've got some fantastic questions in the Q&A section, so I'll just start coming at you rapid fire.
Okay.
What inspired you to choose to study bobcats?
I actually just got really lucky. When you pursue a master's, you are trying to figure out what kind of project to do and where you're going to get funding. And I just happened to do some field work at the Cañada de los Osos Ecological Reserve, and there were a lot of bobcats there. And we started thinking, why are there so many bobcats? So I just ended up doing my food habits study there as for my master's project. And then when this job came along, I was, yes, perfect. So I just got really lucky, to be honest.
All right. So I actually had the same question as this viewer. When you were talking about setting up the game cameras and having 23.1 million photos, is that right?
Yeah.
And then you had to sort through them. Was that done by a computer? Did you have a program that sorted it for you?
Somewhat. So we've been working with a program called Wildlife Insights, which is a fairly new program, and it has changed the way we have been able to do things. So it is AI, artificial intelligence, and since it was fairly new, our project ended up doing a lot of the training for the program. And so as such, we couldn't at first rely on it 100%. So we have to go in and look at every photo and make sure that it's tagged correctly. But now that the program has been built up, it's really reliable. And without that tool, it'd have taken years and years for us to.
That sounds like it'll make it easier for these large scale studies in the future. That's awesome.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, let's see. What is being done to create safer bobcat road crossings? I think we were all sweating bullets looking at the movement of that bobcat across that busy highway.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think actually a lot is being done, especially more recently, especially in Southern California with all of the mountain lion mortality that we're seeing. I believe that Caltrans, the Department of Transportation, and California in general are starting to put more money to these types of road projects. And so although we have a couple of wildlife crossings that are a big deal right now that are in the works, I think more of those types of things are going to be coming our way, which is great.
Okay. So we had kind of a long question about who exactly the fur trappers were in California in the early 1700s. This one, it might be a little tricky, but are we talking about Russian fur trappers? Do we have any information on who specifically was trapping bobcats in California?
I think that the study that I pulled that from was like the Hudson Company. I'm not quite sure. I honestly am not 100% sure. I think there were a lot of people that were trapping to send furs out to different countries, or even for warmth of people in the United States. So I think it was a lot of different folks.
Okay. How long do bobcat kittens stay in the den before they come out with their mom?
They generally travel together for quite a while, for quite a few months, maybe even up to a year. That video at the end was a cat that we had collared, and we got that video of her with her kitten, I would say like 5 months after we think that she had that kitten. And so, you can see it's still pretty small. It's probably learning how to hunt. So I think they're probably in the den for about a month or two, and then they start kind of coming out and learning how to hunt with mom.
Oh. How have storms this winter affected California bobcats? Second part, how is climate change in general impacting them?
That's a good question. And I don't have a full answer to that at this time. I am very curious how these storms are affecting bobcats. I don't really know. All I know is that I was just up in Northern California studying them in an area, and I didn't see a whole lot of bobcat activity. I kind of think that they find a place to hunker down, especially a place where they can get little rodents, close to home. And so they don't have to go too far, just like us, like we're trying to stay inside and stay protected from the elements. So, I mean, I don't know across the state how to answer that question, but I just kind of think that they're probably trying to do what they can to survive. And then climate change is one of the biggest things that we are trying to answer with this study. And, again, I don't really have an answer that's great, but I mean, we do see things like mange more often, we see roadkill mortality more often, which is not necessarily have to do with climate change, but more with human and wildlife interactions. But all of these things will be put together to give us an answer of how they're being affected.
Okay. And this question actually dovetails really nicely with what you were talking about. You just mentioned kind of an uptick in the mange that you're seeing. Is there a cure for it, and are vets able to intervene?
They are. There is a cure for it. And so it can be costly, and it can be the type of thing where it takes a little while for the animal to recover. You basically have to take it into captivity and give it a medication. It needs multiple rounds of medication. And it can take, several months for the animal to start looking better. And then they can be rehabilitated that way and put back out near where they were collected. Again, it requires for somebody to go out and catch the animal and bring it to the appropriate place who can treat that animal, and then to find a place where it can be released again. And then sometimes those animals are susceptible to getting it again. Often mange happens more in places where there are more humans, and so if you just put that animal back on the landscape, then it could get it again, but it is treatable.
Okay. In urbanized areas of the Central Coast, what portion of mammal sightings are bobcats when you compare them to, let's say, coyotes or mountain lions? I think the question is basically, which are you more likely to see? Bobcats, mountain lions, coyotes, which would be kind of the most prevalent to see in an area like ours?
It's a good question. I didn't break down the data from our region for study areas yet. We're still in the process of looking through all of those photos and understanding which ones we've seen the most. I mean, I feel like I see coyotes a lot. I mean, I see bobcats because I know where to see bobcats, and but I also go out to places where bobcats are, like hiking around out in the state parks and stuff like that. And then, I mean, I'm not quite sure how often you would see a mountain lion out there. I know that they're there. And I have heard a couple of things in the news recently about, lions in the area. So, I know they're out there, but I personally, I see coyotes more than anything else.
Okay. And a couple people are concerned about the bobcats in our area in particular. In terms of your study, how are the bobcats in San Luis Obispo County doing in contrast to bobcats statewide?
It's a good question, and also a question that I don't have an answer to yet, because we're not really ready to present the results of the data. And so I have not broken down those results for San Luis Obispo specifically, but I can guarantee you that when the management plan comes out, it will be in there. So I can say that in that one study area that we talked about, we did some trapping to try to put some GPS collars on, and we did catch 2 female bobcats in that area. They were a little small to put collars on, so we decided not to put collars on there. But in that, with that map with the cameras and all the green dots, we saw bobcats basically across the whole study area. So, I mean, I would think they're doing okay.
So in regards to the bobcat management plan, which is coming out in 2025, right? Who's going to be implementing that plan? How is it going to be implemented?
So I'm not quite sure I have 100% of an answer with that. I know that the management plan will go to the California Fish and Game Commission, and then I will be staying with CDFW, and I believe that if there are, tools that we need to do to implement the plan, that will be part of my position and my team and our team at the Wildlife Diversity Program.
Awesome. Okay, we got a question about scat.
Okay.
And that was one of my favorite parts about the bobcat scat having less hair in it. That's awesome way to identify. But also, this person is wondering, do bobcats bury their scat and you're just finding ones that are not buried, or do they not bury it at all?
Oh, that's a good question. So they do, just like mountain lions or even like your house cat, like do a scrape sometimes. And so they'll like scrape the dirt and then kind of poop right there. And they don't really bury it, like most of the time they're just walking down the road and then they just go to the bathroom and they move on. So I see bobcat scats buried less often than like pretty much almost never. And a lot of times the reason they're doing that scrape is to put their scent down on the ground. So they're kind of marking their territory and then pooping. So
okay. Okay. One of the viewers was wondering, do bobcats visit neighborhoods that are within their territory, or do they frequent neighborhoods like within towns and cities? Or do they tend to?
They can. It depends on how close they are to people. And well, okay. So if you have a lot of bobcats in an area and their home range is small, then they're probably going to encroach more into neighborhoods and kind of work around those edges. Like we have raccoons and foxes and coyotes that just come right in, and they live amongst us. But often bobcats are kind of living on the edges. But if they become habituated, they will come more into neighborhoods, especially if there are chickens about.
Another great reason to bring the pets inside and secure the livestock.
Yes.
Okay. I'm scanning through the chat, Q&A. Looks like we have one more question in the Q&A. With this research you have conducted and finding greater than 400 individuals from your study, would you believe that there are any DPS that may be under consideration of listing under the state similar to mountain lions here in SLO County?
Yeah, I don't know that yet. DPS, distinct population segment. I don't know the answer to that yet. We are also working with the CDFW genetics laboratory, and they will be putting out their research on the genetics that they've found for bobcats across the state. So I don't know the answer to that yet. Yeah, that will all come out with the management plan.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us for this awesome virtual mind walk, and thank you for everyone that was here with us.
Yes,
all of your excellent questions as well. So for all the attendees, when you exit this webinar, there will be a short survey that appears on the screen. It's not required, but it would be extremely helpful to us in order for us to hear your feedback and better your experience with the virtual Mind Walk series. We appreciate the time of the attendees and our awesome presenter, Rachel Roberts, and have a great weekend, everybody.
Thank you.